Greetings, everyone. We're recording on Monday, June 14th, 2021, and I am your host, Sean. Joining me today are co-hosts Zach.
Hey, everyone.
And Rob.
Welcome to the Monday Blues.
You're listening to episode 7 of the 444 podcast. This is a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive on 4 select shows from the current anime season and discuss them in 4-episode batches week by week. This week, we're continuing coverage for episodes 5 through 8 for the anime adaptation of the light novel 86. So, as I said, this is a Monday recording. This week, we're releasing the episode a day late because, as is typical, we take pretty detailed notes of each episode for this podcast. And unfortunately, yesterday when we were meant to record, there was an issue where I saved over my notes with a different file. Unfortunately, we were unable to record according to our normal schedule, and now it's being released a day late. I resolved to not let this happen again, but before we move forward to the episode discussion, anything else you guys want to discuss? Any housekeeping items?
So it's okay. Sean was stating that, it was his fault, but what he was really doing was giving me, more Final Fantasy 14 online. Just feeding my addiction. So thank you, Sean.
Well, if we want to talk about crippling addictions, any additional day I get to waste my life with the Binding of Isaac, the better.
Yeah, for sure. I've known plenty to fall down the Final Fantasy 14 hole. I guess it's finally claimed Rob, so... All right.
I like to call myself a WoW refugee, and it's a good place to be a refugee from WoW,
Probably at this point an eternal WoW refugee. I personally don't see myself going back, but all right. With that, if there's nothing else to discuss in housekeeping, let's get on to the episode. So, beginning with episode 5, we are opening up to the wreckage of the helicopter, as we saw in prior episode of young Lena. It's April 13th, stellar year 2142. So, as we recall, her in the helicopter with her father overseeing a skirmish. It's shot down. We see Melise wake to a Legion scout killing a guard. We can infer as part of the helicopter crew. But as the guard is killed, she sees that she's about to be killed next by the scout, but is rescued by an 86 and one of the juggernauts. And we come to learn that this is Shin's brother, Shorei Nozen, but he likes to be called Rei. So she's offered chocolate by him and wants to know why she's being protected by an 86 when her father said the Alba are doing horrible things to them. And he kind of gives a spiel on the ideals and the citizen's duty of protecting the Republic and says that he and his brother were born in the Giad Empire, which we know is the empire that made the Legion, but have lived in the Republic for most of their lives. And he says that he must live to go back to his brother, clearly harboring some regrets there. So any thoughts on this opening scene and how it may recontextualize prior information?
Well, recontextualize, I think it does. Not as much for prior events, but actually this is going to be a major callback in episode 8 with a certain character that I will love to draw parallels to. But yeah, this attitude of Shin's older brother being this sympathetic and compassionate character. And, I think this does a really good job of having us empathize with him before we get to see kind of his...
the other side.
How he's portrayed by Shin's memory as a child. But yeah, very likable. We see, how he saves Lena, and we see the connection they have here as it does play an important role in Lena and Shin's relationships going further into this episode and up through episode 8. I think episode by episode, this only plays a larger and more important role. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, that's kind of the schema that I got from it as well. Like, Lena's memory of Shin's brother is that of fondness, and like we almost as an audience get drawn into it too. Like he does seem okay. Like he does seem okay, but again with the discussion on like episode 8, like we know that this is after a certain incident. So I think there's a lot to discuss about it.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on, and that was all the pre-credit sequence. Moving on to the present, we see Lena asking Shin about her brother, or sorry, about his brother, and that he died on the Eastern Front 5 years ago. Those words being Shin's words. And he said that there is nothing he wants to do after the war, but there's something that he must do before then. So next we see Annette greeting Lena on the way to HQ. We see Lena eating some cake as usual whenever she meets up with Annette. It's usually some sort of dessert. She brings up getting a dress for the Revolution Festival next week. And we see Annette telling Lena again there's no points in doing favors for the 86. Just kind of a small scene, but next we see Shin talking Lena and going to the party. Says that she doesn't need to spend all her free time on war efforts, and that's where we kind of see her agree that she'll just go ahead and do it then. Shin next reveals that he remembers the festival when he was younger, and this kind of sets off in her head, well, wait, what? Did you live in District 1? And because he recalls watching the fireworks, but yet he can't remember the voices of his family. And this is where Lena kind of hears the cat in the background of his room, and she's like, well, aren't you supposed to be on patrol? And this is where we see her flustered on the stairwell, seeing a couple kind of making out. But this is when the scene's interrupted, and the Legion's starting to come, and they begin their sortie. But this is where we see Lena questioning how Shin knows the Legion is coming. So next we see Lena in her terminal, and Shin requests that she cuts off the sink because there are black sheep nearby. And this is where we see Lena begin hearing voices that Shin is hearing through the parade. And they hear Kaie, the girl who died in the prior episode, at the end of episode 3. And then she just begins getting flooded with voices, and this is where she has to cut the parade. Before I continue, though, any thoughts on these couple of prior scenes from you guys?
Oh yeah,
you go
definitely.
first, Rob, because I have
Go ahead. There's a lot I covered there.
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty interesting that Lena did say that combat had no warning, or for these Legion incursion, like HQ had no warnings of encroaching combat. So like, how does Shin know that the Legion are coming? And hearing those voices, that scene in and out of itself was goat. Like,
I love how this is also foreshadowed from episode 2, because we see Lena comment on how fast Shin was able to respond when we first get our first quote unquote combat sequence with the Juggernauts, because them and their crew in the city, like when they all come together for the first time and we really see what these machines are capable of, Shin does bring the whole crew to them first before Lena actually like reports on the Legion incoming. So not only is I think this a good payoff for the foreshadowing, but this also is a great setup to where the narrative is taking us with the rest of episode 5. But as a whole, like this sequence of Lena like hearing the voices of the deceased in these like ghoul, like deceased spirit like voices in her head, like it's a very haunting but brilliant sequence in my opinion.
Right, and we learned that they're named Black Sheep, and even before that, like Shin's like, hey, you need to cut your parade, and Lena's like, no, I'm not going to do it, and he even goes out of his way saying, all right, I warned you.
Yeah, and this is where we finally see why all the prior handlers of this Spearhead Squadron with Shin have all either killed themselves or just quit, or both. So she's finally experiencing this for herself. And later, we see her in her room, as we often see in the series. We see a lot of her time in her room. And of course, we often see those flowers on the wall representing her mood in some way or her attitude towards hope or what have you. It's largely interpretive, but we see her in her room. She starts recalling many of these voices, and we see a sort of breakdown. I love this scene. It really uses its so before that, I just want to say in general, this show uses its visuals to maximum effect, like all the time.
Absolutely.
There's not a wasted moment of visual storytelling in this show. So many shows are content to use static, boring shots as, you know, the characters just mouth flap on about whatever. But this show is chock full of interesting compositing and direction, and
I agree 100%. Not one moment of this show feels like it's wasted on like the direction of the scene compositions. It's impressive.
Yeah. And this scene in particular, we're seeing her going through a mental breakdown, reliving those voices she was hearing. And I love how the camera kind of inverts and the screen's red, the vision's warped. It's like really
right.
I mean, it's a very clever like interpretation of like the chaos in her mind.
It's turning her world upside down, you know.
Quite literally.
Yeah, she's finally having to grapple with the ramifications of what Shin is dealing with every time they sortie. And yeah, she's having a breakdown. And it flashes back to the earlier scene where they were battling after that. Shin is able to locate Kaie through her voice because, I mean, we can easily infer at this point that these voices are people who have died in combat. And the squad destroys her Legion unit. And after the battle, Raiden notes no handlers ever called back after hearing the voices. But when Lena does, he's impressed at her resolve to keep continuing on.
Well, they all seem impressed. They're all kind of like taken aback by her actually calling back.
Yeah. And so this is where we next have an extended scene with Shin speaking to Lena. And this is where we learn a hell of a lot of important information about the Legion themselves and somewhat on Shin's nature. So Shin says he once almost died, and that's why he can hear the voices or the ghosts of the army of a lost country that no longer has any reason to exist, i.e. the Legion. So he always hears them even when he's asleep. And he says that he's aware of every Legion past the former borders of the Republic. And Lena, of course, asks if it's painful, and he just says he's used to it since he's been dealing with it for so many years. So he brings up the 2-year prediction of the end of the war. Lena says their processing unit, the Legions that is based off of the human brain, that the design will cause it to stop functioning after 2 years. That's why the Republic is so confident that this war will end in 2 years. Next, we learn that Shin says human brains are being harvested from the battlefield corpses and are being copied as processing units for the Legion, because ultimately human brains are still more efficient general processors than the original mechanized ones that Giad made, or Giad, and says that they can't be communicated with. They're basically just an echo of the minds from the moment of death from the people they harvested from. So you can't communicate with them, but they still have the raw processing power needed to be effective battlefield drones. And he comes to call them black sheep, and they're the aforementioned ghosts hiding among the white sheep, saying that they're now more numerous than the white. And the white being the original Legion units, the completely mechanized ones. But these new ones, these black sheep, are actually copies of these human brains they're taking off the battlefield. Often damaged, though. But before I finish this scene, any thoughts on what I just covered?
You gave a pretty concrete explanation for this. Like, most of what he described is explained in this sequence in the episode. Mm-hmm. And I think it is important to note, because I'm sure he was just about to get to this part, but these sheep also, in rare instances, have a leader whose the human brain that they do harvest is undamaged.
Mm-hmm.
And we come to find out these are labeled as shepherds. But no, up to this point, the explanation is good. And I think the more you explain, there's more to unpack with this.
Yeah, definitely. I guess my question though was, how does this revelation like factor into your thoughts on prior scenes or episodes, if you have any?
I think it's a great payoff for the foreshadowing that's come to play up until this point in the series. Because, like I alluded to earlier, in episode 2, we saw an instance where Shin was aware of the legions congregating in a city nearby before they were even given the command to go, which impressed Lena, and she was even back then she was impressed that at the speed at which they responded. Well, now at the beginning of this episode, this was a very clear sign when they were both synced with the para raid that he was able to immediately respond as soon as he heard the voices. So this was an instance that she couldn't ignore or chalk up to happenstance. Like, this needed to be addressed, which led to this very revealing conversation. I think this contextualizes a lot of like the questions and quote unquote mystery that we've had up to this episode.
True. Yeah, so next, he tells Lena that the Republic is going to lose this war, as the new units do not have the 2-year design constraint, and that the 86 are being killed off at a rate that will not sustain the war effort. And he asks her if the Alba will fight now, given that they've only learned to push the war onto someone else. And she brings up the amount of Legion being observed have halved, but then he counters only what's observable, saying that there's more at the rear and it's by design. The Legion are intelligent enough to make this deception. So she says they aren't that smart, but he says that it's the reason the Republic will lose, because the Black Sheep are still better at processing than normal Legion, and that the Republic is underestimating them. So this is where Shin brings up the idea of the Ghost Commander, who leads and guides the unthinking Legion, and as Zach said, he refers to them as shepherds, saying that their armies are vastly more powerful than the others. He says he hears their voices and that they travel far. So this is where the credits kind of begin. Lena says that she'll do everything to help them win and destroy the Legion. And with that, with the rest of that, what do you all think of that?
So overall thoughts for me
Yeah.
is on a scale of how fucked up this is from 1 to FMA's Chimera episode. I give it a solid 8 out of Edward, play with me.
Oh man, that's gonna cut deep for some.
Yeah.
Personally, I think this is a fantastic episode all around. A lot's revealed in this. A lot of like contextual storytelling is paid off and simultaneously set up for like episodes to come. I do like to point out that anytime that, if you notice, like very subtly, Shin's face will, like, he'll start to smirk anytime he contemplates or thinks about his brother. And there's a very interesting moment towards the end of episode 5 where he's ending this conversation with Lena about the existence of the shepherds, because Lena's like utterly shocked. She even exclaims, this isn't just a hypothesis, like he already has like proved their existence. And Shin, of course, smirking, makes the comment, yes, there's one at the rear of Combat District 1. And before we even like get to reveal who the shepherd is, I think we can strongly allude to, just based on the foreshadowing and the storytelling that we've had up to this point, it's very likely to be his older brother. But of course, that's speculation up to episode 5. But I think it's very, very smartly constructed.
A reasonable assertion. I mean, the post-credits sequence, we do see Shin's neck scar in the mirror and a vision of him being strangled when he was a child. And this is where he says, "I'll be going soon, brother." So, yeah, I mean, these revelations definitely reveal why Shin has been executing all of the mortally wounded squad mates after each battle. He makes sure to shoot them all in the head. So, with this new knowledge, it serves a much more practical purpose rather than purely being a mercy killing.
Right.
Definitely.
A lot more layers to it.
Yeah. It also, I think another interesting thing was, is the Republic going to be able to stand up once all the 86 are gone? You know, because all of the 86 themselves are going to be gone soon. This is unsustainable. You're going to run out of meat puppets to throw into this fight. So what's going to happen when the Alba people are finally going to be thrown to the wolves?
Exactly.
An interesting prospect. The answer to that, a bit more nuance as we get more into these episodes, but yeah, that's an interesting thought to say the least. So moving on to episode 6, it's snowing. We see that's December 17th of the stellar year 2144, so several years prior. We see a tank stop. Shin gets out, a younger Shin. He gets out of his tank. He finds frozen corpses among an old library in an abandoned town. Really great, mournful piano music. Again, the imagery, the use of imagery in this show is never wasted on any scene, no matter how mundane. But the music is always used to maximum effect as well.
I'm usually a big music nut, but yeah, like just in lieu of praising the storytelling and like the art direction and just the scene composition, man, the music in this series is almost never wasted or never underutilized. Especially and the imagery with Shin, walking up and seeing, the corpse of his brother, like you even see the ray of light, and it's, obviously alluding to his affection and him looking up to his brother. I mean, this is
well, it's not even the music. Like for me, like I literally have to turn this down in the Crunchyroll player because like the sound of it, like at full kill, is just overwhelming for like mech fights. It's insane. The sound direction is just about as impeccable as the scene composition. So
yeah, I love that this series is willing to let a scene breathe, and it does it so consistently and almost always to maximum effect. Like you'll have extended sequences like this of no dialogue where a mood is being conveyed just through the shots and the music. And as you said, Zach, when he walks up to his brother's mangled tank suspended beneath a moonlit beam, it's all so dramatic, but it all just works perfectly. And of course, he sees the headless corpse of his brother, and that's where the scene ends. This is the pre-credits scene, but it just conveys that mood so perfectly, so mournfully that it just, for me anyways, I just couldn't help it getting to me. It's great.
Oh, for sure. And I think what's some of the best things to come from this sequence as well is not only what's shown, but also what's not shown. Because this is the same stellar year where Lena was rescued by Shin's older brother. So they're around this.
That was 2142. That was 2 years prior to this.
2 years. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So this is where, and this is how Shin knows his brother died in the Eastern Theater. So because he directly came upon his corpse. But this is also where he shoulders his brother's insignia. He lets it live on through his own tank. The headless Reaper. I guess that's kind of where his legend begins with that title. So next we go to July 27th, stellar year 2148, back to the present. Spearhead Squad, they're going down an abandoned highway. They're complaining about the summer heat, and they make note where they move past where they once had a flower viewing party. So flashback to April 5th, several months prior. They're in the very same highway at night, surrounded by sakura trees. And also, God, I just want to keep gushing about the background art. Like, so the music, the composition are great, but also the background art is great. The background art is also always used to maximum effect. There's so many little details. The way these trees are illuminated, because all the lighting is right around the tanks themselves and their squadron, but the further away you get from it, the lighting's dimmed and you can see more of the night sky and the darkened trees. Like this is so innocuous, but it really just sets like the mood perfectly. The place, like I'm just immersed by it, is what I'm saying. It's a very immersed.
I couldn't agree more. I was saving my gush for a brief moment between Kai and Shin, but man, I couldn't agree more.
And I'll get to that, but I want to constantly call attention how fantastic the background artwork is, and even the stars in the background are not static. Like they're twinkling and they're variable. Like Okay, but enough of that. That's all I'm going to say about the background artwork and like for this stretch. But I just needed to call attention to it. Like this scene's like a perfect example of what I love about the background art in this. But yeah, moving on. This is where we learn a lot more about the squad. This is April 5th, several months prior. Daya's kind of the main focus as they're all talking about their terms. We learned that most of these people are in their 4th year of service. This is where, I mean, we already knew prior, but everyone reveals Daya's crush on Anju. And then they talk about rumors of there being a female handler that we clearly know is Lena that they're talking about, but she's not yet their handler. So they all kind of begin speculating on what she's like. Theo draws her as like a pig princess. So next we see the scene I believe you're talking about, Zach, with Kai having a conversation with Shin. And we learn his insignia is not originally his own, and it is in fact the one that he took from his brother's tank. So, and we see much of the rest of the squad coming up to Shin, showing their trust in his intuition on the Legion placement, that they trust him, that this is a safe spot to have this little party. And we see many of the now deceased squad members openly place their faith in him in this scene. So before I move on to the next scene, any of you guys' thoughts on it?
Rob, I'm going to let you take over for just a second here because I do want to commentate on the conversation I alluded to with Kai.
I mean, it's a great scene to get to know a lot of the members, even like Kai. Like, god damn it, like way to gut punch us here with Kai. Like,
just giving a character we already like know and have come to appreciate, just retroactively make us wish we could see more of her.
Right. She does make that
show.
Right.
Yep.
She does make that allegory with the cherry blossoms in Short Life.
Good point.
But still appreciates the cherry blossoms for what they are, and the beauty and the, being able to flourish throughout life despite their shitty circumstances.
Yeah.
So Kai had that really like go-getter attitude and like still semi hopefulness for the 86, which goddamn, like,
and
again, way to fucking gut punch me here.
I'm glad you brought that up because in Japanese culture, sakura, the cherry blossoms, they do represent the concept of impermanence, that life is fleeting but also beautiful. But many people don't like that idea of the impermanence. So,
yeah, no, that was something I was going to bring attention to because, I mean, even just from her dialogue, there's a clear parallel between the Sakura petals and the 86 themselves. Originally people who were going off to battle hated the cherry blossoms, like you allude to, Sean, like people hating the thought of impermanence. But even though these flowers have a short lifespan, they all bloom and fall at the same time. They leave branches behind easily as if there's nothing holding them back at all. Like, this is a very, very on the nose, yet, a subtle way to display her attitude towards, she, like Rob said, there's an optimism to her viewpoint. She understands that they're all in a really fucked scenario and there's nothing they can do to stop their fate. But she's taken this moment to step back, like stop and take a look at this and is just appreciate it for what it is.
So great point. And I just want to say, let it never be known that this series is subtle about just about anything. It pretty much beats you over the head with its imagery and themes, but I personally appreciate that. I like both ways of storytelling. I appreciate subtle storytelling and I appreciate the opposite. But
well, let's consider though, probably not a whole lot of people will review these episodes multiple times and like stop to consider these. I take it as subtle because it's not brought up in conversation.
Okay, I guess what I wanted to say was there's a lot of charged, nuanced visual storytelling. The themes and ideas are not that subtle, I guess is what I wanted to say. But
well, surely not, but I also reckon probably not to us, but
So
I would.
maybe I guess what I mean to say is this show is so charged with its visual storytelling, it's easy to overlook a lot of these details. But if you just take one moment to look at any given scene with any given visual, it's not that hard to infer the meaning behind it. It's just
sure.
that there's so much from scene to scene. It's so rich. It's so visually rich. I love that about this show. Like,
Oh, absolutely.
just about every second of this show, you can unpack something just from the visuals alone. But yes, back to the present. So 4 months later, again, back to the hot summer in July, we see another battle with the Legion. And now we're seeing a bunch of little humanoid versions among their contingent. So we see Burnt Tail, who we come to know as Leka, a minor character. She gets incapacitated in a shallow river with her juggernaut. Her hatch blows open. Daya tries to save her, but is also immobilized and is very quickly taken out by a few of these humanoid suicide units. So they latch on, they blow up against his juggernaut, and this is where we see the pilot of Burnt Tail. So Leka, she shoots herself in the head before Legion can come in and make the finishing blow on her. This is where Shin asks Lena to cut the parade as he's about to shoot Daya at the end of this scene. But she refuses, saying that this is all she can do, and she wants to shoulder any of the emotional burden she can. So before I get into what happens at the barracks, any quick thoughts on this scene, this sequence?
Fuck.
Yeah, right. Like Lena's carrying the weight of 2 more lost.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
fuck.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say of the air quotes more minor characters, Dai is definitely one of the ones we got to know more of among them. So yeah, it hurts seeing Daya getting taken out like this. And yeah, just seeing Shin I want to say mercy kill, but also there's the practicality of it. Killing him like that, it was rough to watch. So
Yeah.
back
Well,
to
and his last words, bro. His last words.
yeah.
And then you get that close up with Anshu where she bites her lower lip. Like, fuck.
Yeah, definitely. And back at the barracks, we see Anju. She is trying to put on a brave face, but she's clearly crestfallen. Shin and Raiden are discussing the aftermath, reiterating Shin's mission to give a grave to his brother. So next we see a flashback of his brother after he shoots Daya, and this triggers a traumatic memory of his brother strangling him as a child, blaming him for his parents' death in his deployment. So we can infer once Shin shot Daya, something came into contact with him at that point. My thought at that point was that was his brother reaching out to him when he did that. So next, on July 27th, we see Lena having more dessert made from Annette. She receives a birthday present from her. Annette reveals she's not interested in people her age, as these people her age are too childish, as she says. And Lena asks about what would happen with a parade if it was having mind-altering effects on the handlers. And this is where Annette says they'd pop open the processor's skull, examine the handler, and transfer them to a different unit, thinly veiling what they would do with her. So before we move on to the last scenes of the episode, went over it quickly, but any thoughts on these last few scenes?
Yeah, I mean, again, these are very densely packed episodes. Like, I feel like we already did a disservice to Annette in our first, our covering of the first 4 episodes, because she has a lot of importance to Lena as far as her relationships go.
Yeah.
And this is one of the prime episodes that puts this just out in the forefront, because you will slowly see Annette peering over Lena with like distaste or discomfort. Like the more she grows attached to the 86 and striving to go out of her way to help them, like there's clearly a bearing on her conscience that she's holding back but is slipping through the cracks. But with that being said, yeah, I do love that in this moment you see Annette's attitude towards explaining to Lena what would happen, as with what you just brought up, and you see Lena's visible shock and confusion on her face. We don't actually see Annette's, but as you can with episode 8, again, we're going to get to it, but there's a very clear reasoning to the cold demeanor and the way she treats the 86, or her attitudes towards them anyway. So there's much to discuss, but I think this is a very important scene to building up to that.
Yeah, take note of potential suitors her age being too childish and why she avoids them.
Yes.
So next, we see Lena in her room reflecting on what Shin has been doing to the mortally wounded pilots. Very small scene, but again, the direction is amazing. I felt the need to call attention to it. Next scene, we learn that the Spearhead has 16 units left after this last battle as she's debriefing her uncle, Carl Stahl. So she brings up the idea of using mortars to save the lives of the 86, which draws a glare from her uncle. And she says it's also more efficient, and he counters saying using them would put them in the minefields between the base and the battlefields, and says taking any risk for the 86 is pointless, essentially, saying that they can be replaced, but Republic soldiers can't. And this is where we see him assign a new mission to the Spearhead regarding a new Legion base, saying that must be taken out quickly before it can be completed, but also before the Spearhead can be resupplied or reinforced. So next scene, we see Shin, after being debriefed on the mission, saying that they're aware of the new base and believes it's a trap set up for them. Theo remarks that they've never seen the mortars actually used and would be surprised if they still even work. Shin, afterwards, the only one left on the comms, shows concern for Lena, asking if she's all right. Lena has a conversation with him about his brother and sweets. Shin wants to know about his brother's expression when she spoke to him, when he rescued her. And at the end of the conversation, this is where, once again, we see her flustered, ending the call while looking at the chocolate she opened, ending off on that great ending scene shot. So this is where the episode ends. Any parting thoughts of this episode?
Oh, absolutely. So Lena's uncle's like, how many machines do we have left? And Lena actually replies, we have 16 people. Yeah. Like, we need reinforcements for the Spearhead unit, and her uncle will not authorize help. And then completely warns her, like, stop siding with the 86. Like, stop being ridiculous. So we got some, allusions to how her uncle operates in previous episodes, but I don't know, call it naivety, but I was really holding out hope that her uncle would, kind of follow in her dad's footsteps and at least like I said, naivety, have some sort of backbone, or even just like
a sliver of compassion.
Yeah, a sliver of compassion, a sliver of humanity. But no, he is completely indoctrinated.
Also, can we just appreciate how extra this scene opens, like with a shot on her hand, just like panning up to her face, and like it's like a pseudo like 3D animated.
I'm gonna have to go back and check that. I didn't make
it's extra as hell, and I love it.
God.
Well, and we even
after.
We even get to the point where, like, at the end of this episode, like, Shin is actually showing concern.
Yeah, that's Lena. And thank you for bringing that up, because this was the second time I wanted to call attention to Lena and Shin's developing relationship as a consequence of Lena being rescued by Shin's brother. Because, we first get a proper introduction to Ray in the last episode, but, we see their conversations lean more to personal interests, and especially with Shin now expressing concern over Lena's like health, like mental health and well-being, and the conversation like starts to lean more towards their personal feelings towards Shin's older brother, and that obviously there's a romantic interest there, as alluded by Lena's being flustered and the chocolate with the heart on it. I mean, that's not something I'm gonna call subtle.
Yeah. Right. I'm not saying that it's subtle, but like even at the same point, like we have two completely different viewpoints in regards to Shin's brother. Whereas Lena remembers him fondly, and Shin's like, yeah, he was kind of fucked. He kind of lost it at the end. So it's a really nice juxtaposition from characters' viewpoints. I really like it.
So my thoughts, I want to call a bit of attention to Shin's character, and then we'll take a really quick break. But so last time, the last episode we discussed 86, I brought up a quick comparison to the series All Noah Zero. And Shin, like the main character in All Noah Zero, is a very competent, relatively stoic individual. But the difference between the two is Shin is an actual character with vulnerability and compassion beneath the surface of his character. He's not some hyper competent plot contrivance that's just meant to solve every issue. So this is largely what I love about his character. Despite the fact that he's one of the people that has some of the biggest reasons to hate his oppressors, he still has the capacity to hold compassion for them. And Lena, he's probably the first person to, among the Spearhead unit, to just accept Lena for who she was. He understood her naivete, but he appreciated her sentiments nonetheless. Mm-hmm. So seeing him in this scene show genuine concern for her, I don't know. It goes a long way to describing how he feels and how he views.
Well, it goes to great lengths to showing the development in his character, which, man, if there's going to be any light year of difference between this and All Noah Zero, it's character development.
Yes.
I couldn't give a flying fuck about whoever his face is from that show.
Yeah. The difference is these are actually characters that feel human.
Not copy paste, what their face is.
Yeah, apologies, Rob. I know you haven't seen it, but oh my God. All right, with that, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So with episode 7, we open with August 25th, stellar year 2148, so about a month later. The opening scene of the Spearhead shooting off fireworks with close-ups on the various faces of the squad members. And then next we see August 15th, so flashback about 10 days prior. We see Lena ordering supplies for the Spearhead Squadron, where she refers to the supplies she wants to send as special ammunition, bribing the officer in charge, clearly wanting to give them said fireworks under the pretense of something it isn't, but she's willing to bribe. Next, we see Lena sync with the Spearhead Squad in her terminal, and then flash forward again to her walking in the streets during the festival with drunken celebration among the populace, intercut with scenes of Kurena, the redheaded 86 character among the Spearhead, chastising Lena for her apparent discomfort at the screams of dying soldiers, saying, "This is normal life for us that you send us on every day, that we die in every day." So, I mean, not everyone in the Spearhead is as sympathetic to her sheltered perspective as, say, Shin or even Raiden is. So I know I went through that very quickly, but any thoughts on these opening scenes from this episode? I especially like the sequence of Lena speaking with Kurena as she sees all this revelry for the festival going on, intercut, with these descriptions of these 86 being torn apart, screaming from Kurena. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
I've got a lot to say. So first off, for the opening scenes, Anju, no, I feel so bad for her.
Yeah, because she began crying, right?
Right.
Yeah,
well,
when the fireworks shot off.
Yeah. And then the juxtaposition of Karina advising on what happened versus the gross excess of the Republic is just straight up repugnant, dude. So she's stating everything that, we listen to our friends and family die screaming and everything, while it shows in these scenes itself the Republic in excess, rich access, eating really good food and having a really good time and just being non-bothered by any of the war that's going on. Was that a fucking powerful scene?
One could say behaving like pigs, huh?
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I mean, It's disturbingly true to life. This is the reality of many oppressive regimes built on the backs of the underclass or the people being systematically wiped out for their cause. You can see time and again in history scenes like this, and frankly, even continuing in today. Prosperity is so often built on the back of incredible, inhumane suffering. So, I mean, one of the reasons this series will always hold a special place in my heart is how raw it is at conveying that, and how often it does it too. So,
Right, and it really does not shy away from what could
no,
otherwise be interpreted as just very offensive for the sake of like shock value. No,
no, it's never for shock
this
value.
has no, this has a very clear message. It has something it wants to say and does not back down from it. I
Right, it
find that
doesn't
very
shy away
bold
from it. Yep.
storytelling.
Well, I mean, at least in anime, it's bold, because you don't get this level of nuance that often, at least in anime. I would argue largely in media in general, but especially not in anime. So,
Mhm.
huge props to the team that adapted this work and how much care they did it with. I feel like this team adapting this really understands the essence of what the author was going for in this story. Like to me, this reeks of passion project through and through. So
Absolutely. Like I see very intentional like passionately crafted work on display.
yeah, again, this is nothing about this is cheap in the way it's produced. Every single scene is just it's inspired in its direction. So next scene we see Lena having a conversation with Raiden and Theo because Shin is asleep, so it's just them on the call. Lena notes they've not been given reinforcements since she was assigned and will work her hardest to get them. They seem nonplussed at this promise, but they said, okay, sure. So next, we see Carl Stahl having a discussion with her, noting that Lena has once again overstepped herself by complaining directly to him, with her saying she can't wait any longer for reinforcements for the Spearhead, and that she'll do anything to help them, even going so far as to beg. This is where he says resupply and replacement plans are a settled matter, and asks her if she's ready for the Revolution Festival party.
Come in a proper dress, he says.
Yes, well, because to him and to many of the upper crust, she's part of a prestigious family. Her real political power is in being a piece of this family, not so much in her duties as a handler, but
They see her more valuable as eye candy than a commander.
yeah. So, and unfortunately for her, she wasn't able to see through the settled matter. She still seems to hold some good faith in what he's saying, when really she should have taken that for what it was. So, next, she wears a black dress at the party, hoping it'll ward off suitors.
Which, by the way, was fucking fantastic because
Yeah.
the allusion to wearing a black dress to this upper crust fucking party. It's like, I'm mourning the death of my squad. Like, let's fucking go.
Yeah.
You go, girl. I'm about this. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively toothless, but she is, to her credit, taking every opportunity to show her displeasure at the situation, of her reality, of what she's taking a part in. But yeah, I agree. And Annette's with her briefly, but she runs off when she sees one of her air quotes fiancés that she wants to avoid. So
Annette does, by the by.
yeah. And this is where we see Shin calling in, wanting to talk with Lena. So she walks out to an empty balcony. He tells her the fireworks made it, and this is where we kind of get a extended scene where they talk about memories of District 1 before the war, how he lived there before he was sent off with his brother, his thankfulness of her talking about his brother. He mentions Anju's ability to finally be able to cry over Daya, and the crux of the scene, if she'll remember them when they're gone, timed perfectly as the fireworks grand finale happens. She says, of course, but resolves to not let any more die. I think this deserves a minor discussion on its own, but before I move on, any thoughts on this scene? Again, I think it's really just in the compositing and the visual details accentuating the conversation that really sold me on this scene. But what about you guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
you go first, Rob.
man, there's so much to say about, Lena coming in a mourning dress, like a funeral dress, and she straight up said, I want to see fireworks with you, Shin. Like, I'm going to get you out of this so that you can come back to District 1. And Shin's like, well, are you going to remember us as well?
Yeah, he just cuts the chase. He knows that's not happening.
Right.
Will you remember us? That would be good enough for him.
Well, and we get this kind of like prelude to something that none of the others are telling Lena. So, like, what is that? What is that? What about you, Zach? What do you think?
I mean, I was only going to compound on that statement where, like, she kind of backsteps, telling Shin, she wishes she could see them together with him, but she immediately gets, like, removes that thought and replaces it with someday let's all watch the fireworks here in District 1 together. Like, I think there's some at play here. There's still this hesitance with Lena. There's a part of her that feels guilty that she can't do more and be there with them to support them in person, but she's still holding.
It's naivety. She's 100%.
Yeah, she's still holding on to the hope and fantasy is more like it that they'll get to see their retirement and come home. They just have to make it. They just have to make it to their 5 or so years of service, and then they can come back. There's an end sight to their fighting in this war. But like you said, there's something that's not being said here that the others are wary of, but Shin is not letting Lena on in yet, which is going to play a very important role later this episode. Yeah. So I won't spoil it. So yeah, I'll hold my thoughts.
That leads right into the next scene where we see a conversation between Kurena and Anju as they're taking a shower, and they discuss the elephant in the room, deliberating if they should tell her about it. And this is where we kind of learn from Anju about the scars on her back, lamenting about Daya. He's only one who didn't call attention to the reason she was growing her hair. He just mentioned how her hair looked beautiful. And next we see Kurena saying she doesn't have the right to tell Lena. We see a quick flashback where she sees Shin shooting a dying pilot in a juggernaut. And she's comfortable with her situation because she believes Shin will take them to their final destination, but who will take him? So 2 days later, the attack on the forward base begins that's been talked about this last episode. Shin reminds them it's a decoy and that they're seeking to lure the Legion out of their holes, at which point the 4th platoon will attack. And then we suddenly see the clouds open up from above as artillery cannons begin taking out the spearhead units one by one, intercut to shots of the pilots' faces from 2 days before at the fireworks. Each pilot dying, we see their face as they die. And Lena informs them that the launch point of these artillery cannons is 120 kilometers northeast. So they're ultra long-range cannons that the Republic has never seen before, kind of giving credence to what Shin said a couple episodes prior, that the Legion they're advancing, they're evolving, and he intuits this as his brother's work. And this is where Lena orders them to retreat. Before I move forward, any thoughts on this scene?
I was really just going to also just add a little addendum to that point there. I mean, Shin already explained, like, the second reason they'll lose is how they underestimate the Legion and their them conserving their forces. Like you said, this gives credence to what he said in the prior episode. Just, we're seeing them use the artillery and weaponry in ways that the Republic hasn't seen before. And they're starting to become a much more, like, visible threat, but not much more before we get into the next part on my part.
Agreed.
Like, the way I see it is they're much more proactive in their strategy now than reactive. So, sorry, Rob, did you have any thoughts?
Nope, I agree 100% with what Zach said. Yep.
So, after they retreat, Lena promises reinforcements desperately. There's no conviction behind her voice in this, but Shin breaks it to her at this point that the mission is ultimately one of suicide. The squads are only replaced once the prior one is wiped out. Theo makes the observation that the 5-year term is just bait and that the Republic can't have those who have survived their sorties becoming heroes for potential rebellion. These individuals are just sent to the worst of the fighting, the closer they are to the end of their term, and the best, the smartest, near the end of their terms are sent to the spearhead to finally be extinguished.
Right, and I'm going to interject real quick.
No,
Can we
no
just
problem.
appreciate that a lesser show would have done this exact same thing in a much cheaper, like more artificial way to make us empathize with these characters by, leading them to their premature deaths. But can we just appreciate the reasoning why not only does Theo give very solid reasoning for, why there is no retirement or end period to their terms of service, but yeah, any spectacle of these 86 giving independence and bearing rise to a rebellion. I just love how this is made on no uncertain terms. It's very clear and obvious that the Republic under no circumstances will let the 86 thrive or move on past this war. I just love that. It's very expertly crafted. And I don't mean that in an exaggerated way.
It's the brutal mechanical efficiency of ethnic cleansing through genocide. It doesn't pull any punches about it. It doesn't sensationalize it. It's just, this is what this is. So, no, I absolutely agree.
Good shit.
Next, Lena makes the, I want to say, accurate observation that this is just a slaughter. And she wants to know why they don't fight back or seek vengeance when they know the reason they're being sent to slaughter. And this is where Raiden gives a really good breakdown. He says it would be easy to have vengeance, but brings up the stories about various squad members who have known good Alba and remarks that not all 86 are good either. And the crux of his argument is just because scum treats you like scum, doing the same doesn't make you any better. And says that if the only two paths are to die fighting the Legion or to die giving up, we'll survive to the last minute and go down fighting. So with that, any thoughts from you guys before we move on to post-credits?
Victory or Valhalla?
Yeah, no, I need to correct myself. In episode 5, I brought up that Rie's mindset towards fighting in this war would play a part in episode 8. I was referring to this moment in episode 7 with Raiden. I feel like this is, I wouldn't even call it the antithesis. This is, I think, the conclusive thought process to how Ray was feeling. He's doing this for his brother, but we see Raiden kind of narrate how all of the 86 are feeling. Not all of them are good, but obviously none of them deserve this. But the reason why they continue to obey orders of, let's face it, it is a suicide mission. They all know that they're just going to quote unquote expire, but they don't resolve themselves to wallow in pity or just go down cursing the names of their oppressors and, bearing any resemblance to them. They're resigning themselves to their fate, but in a way that's on their terms and one that they can be proud of. And I just, it's a great moment. Love it.
All right. And with that, we arrive at the post-credits where we see a massive Legion unit take out the remnants of Unit 1, named Falks in Combat District 16, and we can pretty easily infer that this is Shin's brother. So with that, closing out episode 7, any final thoughts from you guys?
Man, this is a solid episode. I don't know if I want to say it's my favorite, but this has great dialogue strewn throughout. Once again, a lot of conclusive narrative beats to what's been alluded to prior since episode 5. Funny enough, just as soon as we learn how Shin is able to respond to these Legion attacking, we know the mystery behind I guess his power, if you will, if you want to call it that. Just as soon as we find out about that, soon enough we're told that they're just all going to be sent to their slaughter. But there's no time to mourn, but there's no time to drag this out, I guess. Like, on no uncertain terms do we get to see these characters in anything but the best of light. Like, they're all shining even in their darkest moment, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, I think the word I want to ascribe to the Spearhead is resolve and acceptance in this episode. Whereas with Lena, it's really the dawning realization that there is no hope of accomplishing what she wants to within the system. This is kind of finally her realizing that and having to reckon with that. Overall, though, my final thoughts, I guess, are, as usual, phenomenally directed. I feel I've said my piece on the visuals and all that, but really, yeah, it's amazing. All right, so then let's move on to episode 8. So we begin on August 27th, stellar year 2148. Shin and Raiden are discussing the enemy's purpose of their ambush from the prior episode, saying that the attack had the secondary goal of testing those new ultra long-range cannons, and Shin says that he's found his brother, and also that his brother has found him, saying that he'll come for him next for sure. And as we mentioned prior, he's smiling in this scene, and we only ever see him actually smiling at the prospect of settling things with his brother. So next we see, so I just wanted to make the note, in this opening sequence, like all of the other openings, there's a shot where we can see the deceased members of the Spearhead squad facing away from the camera, and how every episode that company grows and grows. And in this episode, we see almost all of the deceased Spearhead squad facing away from the camera in that shot. I think it's a cool little detail, but
Yeah, like
really
every Spearhead unit member that we have been introduced to, and like pretty much gets added to that scene at the end of the show's opening. Which, not to spoil the cool thing, because no, I think it's really cool too. But man, if this is probably the only time I'm ever gonna say it, I hate this show's opening. I actually utterly despise it. Which is it's probably the only thing I actually have a genuine hatred for in this series. It's tonally off. I don't even think it prepares you for what's to come, and I can't enjoy it in its own right. So, rant over. Hate it.
Fair enough. I think it's fine. Like, I mean, I'll probably agree it doesn't set the mood as well as it often should, but yeah, to each their own. So, anyways, after this, we see Lena reading the mission orders of the prior Spearhead units, because after hearing what she heard from last episode, she went and dug up all the orders from the prior Spearhead units that she wasn't a part of. And she always noticed at the end before they were cycled out to the new Spearhead, the squads were ordered to, under unlimited mission duration, to go the deepest part of Legion-held territory with no support. And these were always called reconnaissance, deep reconnaissance missions, I believe. So she's verifying what Shin said. She's appalled, and after this, she goes to visit Annette on August 28th in kind of a last-ditch effort, where she tells her about what she's learned and wants Annette to help her. But this is where Annette finally just can't take it anymore. She's enraged. She reiterates that there's nothing they can do to save them, and this is where she divulges her critical backstory of her experience with the 86. So in her backstory, she talks about knowing, and her family knowing, these neighboring scientists before the war, and how they had 2 children, one who was much older and one her age, that she went to school and played with as friends. So she recounts how all the 86 stopped coming to school one day and was bullied because she was friends with a filthy colored. And he didn't know anything about it and still wanted to play, which culminated in her one evening shouting at him to go away, you filthy colored. And
fuck.
Yeah.
Like...
So yeah. And I'll give it a little more time to speak about this in a minute, but she reveals that her father was thinking about taking them in despite the danger, but then the real bombshell, she didn't want to. She told her father that she didn't want to do it and that he wasn't her friend. And she says that she thought in this moment this gave her father the out to giving them the support they needed. And next day they were sent to the camps. So she says, all I could do was tell myself that I couldn't do anything, and accuses Lena of acting like a saint, but saying really she's just as bad as her. And this is where she reveals another bombshell to Lena, that the brothers next door could tell what each other felt without speaking. It's kind of like a form of ESP, recounting the early harmless experiments, but shifted over to much more brutal ones when the military found out. And they demanded her father to perfect this new communication method no matter the cost, with the result being the raid devices that we know now so prevalent in this series, saying that countless 86 test subjects were killed, results first, safety last, and that they all died suffering. So she revealed that her dad couldn't take it anymore. He committed suicide, and later on in her life...
It wasn't an accident.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Later on...
As the Republican literally put it, oh, it was an accident. His death was an accident.
Yeah, I mean, they'll always put on the best spin they can to any gruesome situation. So she took on his work. She blames Lena that they even had to receive the order to die. If she would have just let things take their course as the way the Republic intends, they wouldn't have even received this deep reconnaissance order to essentially get themselves killed. So she tells Lena that she hates her and she never wants to see her again. So with that massive scene, what did you all think about it?
Okay. I've got a lot to say because...
Go for it, homeboy.
Dude, a lot came out of this scene. So, first off, Lena went to Annette's place for comfort and she was asking for help, and Annette just kind of brushes it off. And again, for like the umpteenth time, tells Lena, you need to brush this off. Like, they're not worth it. Give up. And then we kind of get that scene where it's Lena versus Annette, and like Annette's kind of low key a bitch, and we get that backstory of Lynette, and we get some really heavy foreshadowing between two boys that she used to play with that were the colored, with one being an older brother, and the younger brother was of Annette's age. So, 2 District 1 coloreds and 2 brothers.
Yeah, the end of this episode makes it pretty obvious that she's referring to Shin and Ray. So...
Right, but I'm also kind of getting at the point where, like, I'm not trying to forgive Annette's behavior, but I feel like she's in her own self-pity at this point.
Well, yeah, like, this is absolutely her trying to justify her
guilt, her massive guilt.
Exactly, right. Because what she constantly tells herself is, like, there's justification in what she did. She keeps telling herself there was nothing she could do, but this is the clearest of all clear differences between Lena and Annette. Their circumstances are wildly different, and whereas Lena has very little she can actually do to change the fate of the 86, Annette was presented with a very specific circumstance where she had the power to change the fate of these two that would have been sent and did get sent to the camps had she not, did nothing at all. If she had intervened like her father was, initially going to do, like, she could have done something. But, once again.
Oh, it's so just poignant and, like, painful because, like, I don't want to give Annette any sort of, like, benefit of the doubt because, like, she just, like, 180, like, just turn cards and just become a total bitch. It's like, fuck. But, like, at the same point, you got to sit there and, like, try to put yourself in her shoes. Like, did she have any other choice as a child? And she didn't know any of that shit that she was getting into.
Well, let's consider one thing. at the end all be all of Annette's character is she is looking out for number one before anything else. She will pursue
Yeah,
self-preservation
but
above. But
that's
let's
still a child's mindset. Like being
well
traumatized as a child,
Let's
you're
well
still sitting there with the child's mindset. Like I don't know. Like, and I'm
I
not trying to forgive her behavior, but like at the same point, she's still sitting there with that child's mindset of self-preservation rather than the greater good.
well right,
So
and this happens to be like a sour, character
sour
flaw of
grape,
hers.
sour grape. Yep.
well, I mean, I agree on what you're saying, Rob. Like, we can't fault her so much the decision she made as a child. What we can fault her for is how she's channeled that guilt into her behavior into adulthood or
Correct.
yeah. So
But she's been so beaten, and like again, I don't want to say that I'm trying to forgive her behavior or excuse her behavior because that's not what I'm getting at. But as a traumatized individual, like she literally has in her mind no other recourse. Like she doesn't see an escape to this overwhelming like drowning of water consuming her.
Right.
Like
Where she did ultimately choose wrong, however, was in the fact that she did have a choice. There
yeah.
was something she
right,
could have done, but
right, and she chose the wrong choice.
she had convinced herself otherwise when, reality posed her something
Yeah.
contrary.
And it's like I said in the last episode, I thought, well, no, not the last episode. What I mean to say is the last episode that we covered on 86. So I believe it was episode 3 or 4 of 86, where I said Carl Stahl and Annette represent two different types of evils in this show. Annette being the more passive evil, Carl Stahl being the more active version. And like clockwork, like poetry, we're given two basically subsequent scenes. We just got done with the Nets scene in this episode, and it really. So this scene dropped the pants on her character completely, and
Yes.
how she's complicit in her passivity and how she's resolved to not do anything about it. This next scene sees Lena confronting Carl Stahl. And this is another pants dropping scene of sorts. Where
Oh, forget dropping the pants. This is streaking in the city.
Yeah. So let's get into it. So September 10th, 2148, a couple weeks later, roughly, Lena enters her terminal and she finally sees the orders at her seat, and then confronts Carl Stahl in a chapel of sorts in front of the statue of Saint Magnolia.
Such a powerful scene.
Definitely. So she receives these extended reconnaissance mission orders that all the prior units received at the end of their service, and demands that it be canceled because this is essentially the death sentence order. And he comes out and just says openly, all the 86 must die. That's what's best for the country according to its government and indirectly its people. That's the will of the nation. And uses this excuse that if what happened to the 86 gets out after the war, the Republic will become a pariah state and will be remembered forever as oppressors. So when they're all dead, they will cease to have existed, and thus the Republic will have done nothing wrong. And Lena notes accurately that the 86 are part of the Republic and that the ideals of St. Magnolia should protect them too. And this is where we see it really gets to Carl Stahl. And he denounces the citizenry as fools who killed their icon and remarks that humans are not ready to have freedom and equality, that he thinks they never will be. She fires back that he's just saying this to justify his despair, but then he kind of delivers his thesis on this whole topic. Hope and despair are the same thing. You want something and you can't have it. They're two names for two sides of the same thing. So, whereas Annette represented one side of this evil of the Republic, Carl Stahl represents the truly abhorrent side of this is political expediency, but I don't give a shit. I represent the Alba. The Alba are going to be the dominant force in this country. We're conducting an ethnic cleansing. What the fuck are you going to do about it?
Right,
So,
it's genocide. It's genocide, 100%.
it's absolutely genocide, and he just says it without an ounce of guilt. So
right, and whereas Annette has a comfortable place where she can just, like you said, she has a passive role. She can just chalk up, the sentiment of there's nothing she can do. Whereas, this is clearly a man in one of the most powerful positions who has a very active and capable role of changing the fate of the entire republic,
even if it
especially
isn't
the 86.
Even if it is an expedient, even if it does bite him in the hand, even if he were to lose his station, he could change things.
Yeah, regardless, he has that power.
Yeah.
But refuses to do it.
Because ultimately, he's
status
part
quo,
of that.
He's comfortable. He's comfortable.
It's not even... It's part of that. It's part comfort, but I also believe genuinely that he's just as much of a racist scumbag as all of the other top brass, and he genuinely wants to see these 86 just die, just because I think he's that much of a scumbag.
I agree, 100%.
So yeah, I mean, any parting thoughts on that scene or Annette's scene? Because really, those are the crux of this episode, I think.
I mean, like I said, it was a really powerful scene with having the back shot of the statue of the protectress of this country.
She's like their Joan of Arc, because in the end, they killed her. Her country killed her. But later on, she comes to represent all of these virtues and ideals the nation stands for. But really, it's just as hollow as everything else.
Well, and he also says that, hope and despair are the same thing. So another reiteration on hope and despair, which is kind of like at this point, like a schema for Lena's uncle.
Yeah.
I really don't like him. I mean, Zach,
what do you... hope not.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys hit the nail on the head. This is just a man who refuses to, one, compromise his comfortable position, but also I agree with Sean. I think deep down there just is a deeply rooted resentment for the 86. I mean, they can personify the worst qualities that they themselves, the Alba, have, and they push that onto the 86 themselves. I mean, not to go off topic, but for any of you who are familiar with the Fate franchise, the 86 can, in a way, be personified as the Angra Mainyu, where all of the world's evils, all of the worst qualities and traits of humankind that they themselves possess, they push all of that and personify into a certain people, or in that series, an individual. That's how I perceive it.
I think that's your Fate Otaku way of saying a scapegoat.
Yeah, in a sense.
No, I know what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but the way I see it, the very obvious allegory I see here is just how Nazi Germany conducted its genocide against the Jews and all of the other undesirables of their society.
Well, that's how it is. Yeah, it's 100% that allegory. You're 100% right. It's they are undesirables. They're subhuman. We need to get rid of them. And what's the best way to get rid of them? Send them on suicide missions. Fucking kill them. Kill them all.
Label it as reconnaissance. Enjoy your late afternoon tea.
Label it as whatever. They'll use whatever excuse. The government will use whatever excuse to get rid of the undesirables.
So next, Lena notifies Shin of the new orders, though he's already received them, he says. And she says there's no need to obey such ridiculous orders. She recommends they run away.
Yeah,
and then he asks to what end? Everyone dies someday. Shin reiterates that this is what they want and that there is a freedom in this. And he says that he has to fight to go forward. And at this point, she intuits the meaning of what he's saying, and she asks, is this in order to kill your brother? And he says, I wish you didn't realize this. He goes on to say that there's no more need for contact and asks her to not contact them again. So next, on September 27th, we see Shin visit with Aldrich, the kind of the mechanic lead for the spearhead for a final supply check in the hangar. All the last members meet up with Aldrich for the last time. And then we're given a really beautiful montage sequence set to some music and vocals with the last members cleaning the barracks for their incoming replacements. Then they head to their units at dawn with the rain having stopped. They find some parting gifts in their cockpits, like sweets, as they see Aldrich and his crew wave on from nearby. Everyone's mood is upbeat. They're all resolved. They move out. We get some lingering shots of the empty barracks as the music kind of finishes, and a final shot of the five as they head off in the horizon. So before I get to the post-credit scene and final thoughts, what do you guys think of this scene, these last couple scenes?
Just beautifully tragic. I mean, there's not much that can be added to it. What you see is, I mean, yeah, there's more going on, but yeah, these are just people resigned to following out their orders. But more than that, they've accepted it, and they're gonna go out in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is really the epitome of what I said about letting a scene breathe, letting the emotions stew and simmer, and kind of come to a crescendo at the end when they're all heading out into the sunset towards their fate. Like, just spectacular.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then we're treated to the post-credit scene of Shin's brother, Ray. We see him in his dying moments in his juggernaut, and he recounts him losing his mind with rage and grief when he's strangling his brother before he had to go out and be deployed himself. As he was reading the letter, the info that their mother had died, we can infer that their father had already died at some point. And this is where he strangles Shin in that moment. And then we see him get pushed away from an Alba man who I interpreted to be Annette's father, though they were probably already in the camps at this point. I'm not exactly sure on that. I'd have to go back and look at the picture of her father. But anyways, he was stopped. At this moment, he realized he failed as a brother. He couldn't protect Shin. This was his dying thoughts of regret, remembering that moment in his life. And then his head's cut off, and next we see his ghost copy coming for Shin at the end, kind of enraged, saying, "Now I can protect you forever," something of that effect. Any final thoughts on episode 8 or these stretch of episodes as a whole?
And that end scene, though, with the close-up on Shin's brother's face, bro, like eyes twitching, constantly shifting perspectives of how his emotions are. That was a strong fucking scene.
Yeah, I think it really goes to show the shattered mental state he's in. Like, this is something that's feeling all of these emotions all at once. Like, it's a specter of vengeance, basically. Maybe vengeance.
It's a hard watch. It's a hard watch.
And maybe vengeance wasn't the right word, but it has purpose, and it wants Shin.
Right, like, and even on top of that, like, shit. After that, it's like, how can I not watch the next episode?
Yeah, because as you said, you'd gone ahead. So
yeah. Like, you need to watch the next episode. Like, fuck.
So yeah, any thoughts, Zach?
Man, no, I don't have much more to add. Just there's whatever's coming next is gonna hit real hard, and we're gonna have one hell of a finish for this, at least for this core.
Yeah. Needless to say, it's easily gone up to be one of my favorites this season. All of my final verdict, of course, at the end of the season, but what a magnificent surprise this show's turned out to be.
Absolutely. Any semblance or what little like bars of expectations I had at the beginning were completely shattered and skyrocketed. I'm thoroughly enjoying this, like, every episode more and more.
Definitely. Gigantic kudos to the studio and team that worked on this. They couldn't have done a better job.
Agreed.
So with that, I think we're about out of time. So to wrap things up, Be sure to tune in next week for our discussion on episodes 5 through 8 of Odd Taxi. Feel free to give us a follow on our Twitter at 444pod, all fours numerical, to receive any news or updates regarding the podcast. You can also feel free to email us at 444podc@gmail.com. Again, that's all fours numerical, pod letter C @gmail.com with any questions you'd like featured on a future episode. If you like what we're doing with the podcast, we would love if you could like, comment, and subscribe on your platform of choice, as this really helps us gain further traction and visibility. With that, thank you for joining us today. We hope you all have a great week, and join us next time as we discuss the second round of episodes for Odd Taxi. Have a good one, everyone.
Take care.
À tout à l'heure.